Well, good morning, Bethany Alliance Church. There's part of me that wants to say, turn the lights back down, and then I don't have to see your faces. And I mean that from a place of, it is good to see you all. Pulls us back a few years in a really deep place really quick. And man, we miss you. Miss you all deeply. Good to be able to come back. Good to be able to be in this place, if only for a few minutes, and just to get to spend some time with some old friends. There's some wrinkles I didn't expect to see. Here's the dangerous parts of what just happened, is I haven't been here but once in 4 years. And then they just hand me a microphone. And I think, Lord Jesus, please guide my tongue, because I could stand here for hours and run down all kinds of roads. So we'll be careful of that. I am going to share a bit of a message with you this morning. Going to be a little different from what you might expect, sort of a expository sermon kind of thing to be. But we'll get to that. If I could, though, would love to take just a few minutes and give a little bit of an update on our family and life for us. I know that we are getting about 30 seconds with a handful of people in the foyer, but don't get a chance to sit down and actually talk and share a bit deeper. So we'd love to just give you a little snapshot, and then I'll jump into the message. If you're newer to Bethany in the last few years and you're saying, all right, wait a minute, who is this clown, and why is he up there having a moment? You'll have to maybe just forgive that for a little bit. My family, my wife and I came back in 1999 to a place we had never heard of called Charles City, and encountered a group of people we had never met before, and realized shortly thereafter that Jesus was saying, you need to go home, you need to pack your stuff, you need to leave everything you know, the city you're from, the families that you are a part of, and you need to move to this small town in Iowa and become a pastor. And we had no idea what that was sort of setting us up for when we moved here in 1999, but ended up having some of the greatest years of our lives. Spent about 15 years here in Charles City and absolutely loved it. Absolutely was not looking to leave it either. And some of you know that story of Jesus then stepping back in and saying, now I want you to go do something else. And so we've been in Omaha, Nebraska for the last 4 years, serving in what's called the Mid-America District Office. I know my boss was here a few weeks ago, and I snooped his sermon just a little bit just to see, like, where'd that thing go and what did he say. And I get to serve with an amazing man in a fun capacity. I'll share just a bit of that in a minute. But for 4 years now, we've been gone and just straight miss it like crazy. We miss doing life with you all. I have people ask me all the time. I'll get done preaching somewhere, and people say, do you miss being a pastor? And my answer repeatedly is, the greatest thing I miss is getting to do life with Christ in relationship with the same group of people, week after week after week. That for me, I'm a guest speaker now. When I go into churches, they don't know me, I don't know them. I just show up, I do my thing, and go to lunch. And I just realized I just missed the chance to be with the same folks chasing Jesus together, week in and week out. And then preaching and those kinds of things just become sort of icing on that cake. All that to say, everywhere I go and every time I find myself preaching or teaching or training or people ask me that question, I come back to you all. And if they knew you, I'd just say, I just miss Bethany. But that would sound weird for a lot of people out there. But our family is doing really well. We have found Omaha to be a great place to live. We thoroughly enjoy Omaha as a city. Our kids are a part of a phenomenal school, plugged in with some great friends, great neighborhood that we live in. All of that is going well. My kids are growing much like your kids are, and man, we wish we could come back for every wedding, but that would be like every weekend around here, it seems. Our oldest, Carly, is going to be a sophomore in high school. She and the rest of the kids were at a Christian school in Omaha since we got there, a school where there's like 300 students, K through 8th grade. Carly then goes into her freshman year, which they don't have at the Christian school. So she enters into the largest high school in the state, and there's now like 630 kids in the freshman class. And I walk in this place with her, I'm like, well, this kind of feels like a college campus. What are we doing? But the girl has done amazingly well. She's got some fun influence in the campus life ministry there. Played volleyball, marching bands. About to get her license here in like 3 weeks. I bought a couple blazers off of you all, and I need a tank again. So if anybody's got a blazer they want to sell me real quick, let's get that done. She's doing well. Brooklyn, our second, will enter into 8th grade. No idea what happened because she's my daughter and I don't have a musical bone in my body, but the girl just keeps picking instruments up and teaches herself. So she's a phenomenal guitar player, not Jason-like, but she's getting there, writing songs, playing all sorts of other instruments, and then she grabs a ball, and basketball, volleyball, soccer, she's just always at it. The unfortunate thing this weekend is both of the older girls had trips planned with other families. So when we left, they were scattered around Nebraska, doing all kinds of stuff. Andrew, been fun. My son's at an age where, like, we're able to go work on projects together, and it's no longer your kid's just making a mess over there in the corner kind of thing. But like, it's just been fun. We've had a fun relationship. We've got 4 girls and 1 son, if you're wondering why I'm saying that about my son. So just having a ton of fun. And then the 2 little girls, Addison and Caitlin, 3rd grade and 1st grade this next year, just bring life and joy to the house. So super blessed. Kids are doing well. Jamie has been on a fun journey. Caitlin, our youngest, went to school last year as a kindergartner. So Jamie said, I either stay home alone or I go back to school too. And so she's been working at this school this last year, and then this fall will start as a kindergarten teacher at the kids' school. Thrilled out of her mind. Had to jam 5 master's classes into the month of June to get her certificate figured out, and now is redoing a classroom and all kinds of crazy, but doing well. For my parts, I love what I do. I, as the assistant to the DS, have served now with 3 different district superintendents in 4 years. And I always tell people in leadership training, look, after a while, you got to figure out what the common denominator is. Like, what's the one thing that maybe ought to be looked at with all the transition around you? And so me and Jesus have tried to work that through. Like, Jesus, am I chewing up, spitting them out, or what is this? But Rob and I have served together for 2 years now, and the joy in my life today is Rob walks in my office at the beginning of our time together, says, Kent, you've been around, you've been in the district office obviously longer than I have. You know what it is that you do that brings the most kingdom advancement for this district. You just go get after it. And so it's just been a beautiful, fun season of freedom to run hard. I am a part of crazy stuff. Like, I regularly drive away from things just thinking, how do I get to do this? Mostly I play with new stuff. So church plants, established churches that are saying we feel like God wants us to plant, new leaders. I'm the guy that gets the phone call from, hey, we want to go to Zimbabwe as missionaries. How do we get there? And I'll start walking with them, do a ton of trainings, leadership development kind of stuff. Jump in the trenches with church planters and walk with them into seeing new churches get started. Got about 16 projects going on right now in a 5-state area. And just amazing to see stuff the Lord's doing. I got 2 guys, both of them are ex-felons. The one guy's rap sheet is a mile long of all the stuff he did. And Jesus showed up in his life, flipped his world upside down, and he's now a part of a church planting movement in the hood of Omaha. Places I would have thought I'd never get to play there. I've got rural stuff going on out in like really remote places where Jesus is just blowing a wind into some hearts that have walked with him forever, but have never seen the ability to see something new happen in their dying community or in a community where the church doesn't exist. Multiplication stuff where some of the stories I'm playing with, I can't even keep up with them. It's just fun. In the midst of that, I'll get off all this soon. In the midst of that, the Christian Missionary Alliance, the denomination that Bethany is a part of, about 2.5 years ago from the national level said, we'd like to see the country divided into 4 regions, and we'd like to see some of the districts in those regions partner together to go after church planting and kingdom advancement in a greater way together. That landed me as a part of a team in what's called the Central Region, and brought 9 districts together that go from West Virginia to Colorado, Minnesota, down to Missouri. So a pile of us found ourselves in a basement in Chicago about 2 years ago, just starting to pray through, man, Jesus, what do you want us to do with this get after it together thing? And as we started to pray through that, we started to wrestle through just demographics and realize there are about 80 million people in the central region of the country. And our hearts started to realize we're supposed to really do 2 things with these 80 plus million people. One, we're supposed to figure out how we get every one of them repeated opportunity to accept or reject Jesus. In other words, how do we make it so that all 80 million people in the central region have opportunity to know him? And then the second is, how do we build a culture where those who respond are going to be able to be discipled as followers of Christ? And so we took this sort of mandate from the Lord, and there are about 9 of us guys running together, people in my chair, saying, as crazy as it sounds, let's go after 80 million. And just blows your mind when you start to think about the numbers of it. But the things that the Lord has led us into that we're now starting to roll out for local churches, whether that's a place like Bethany or it's in a city, bigger city, or wherever it's at, the things that we're starting to see roll out, we just feel like it's culture shifting kind of stuff. And so it's super fun to play with. But personally, the nuts part of it is they asked my older brother to be the head of this thing. And then my twin brother serves with the guy in my chair in the Midwest district, and so he's at the table all the time too. So out of like 9 of us, it's me and my 2 brothers and like 6 other people. And Kurt and Todd and I found ourselves in a breakfast room a while back in a hotel. We were grabbing coffee, and we just had this moment together it was just like, how did we get here? Not like a ladder kind of got here, but how did we get to the place where we get to chase after this stuff together? Crazy blessed. For 3 brothers that back in high school bawled their eyes out on a conference room floor in Colorado at Life. I'll send people to Life still. Where we committed our lives to Jesus in full-time ministry, and our prayer as 3 brothers was, Lord, if we ever got to do it together, we'd be so grateful. And here we are 20 years later, 25 years later, running together. And I just think, man, Jesus, that's just gracious. I could keep going. Some of you have been watching some Facebook stuff and pictures out of Europe. That was nuts. My dad, something tripped in his brain. He's not a traveler, hates flying. Ever since he was in Vietnam, he just hates flying. And wanted to make a lifelong dream for my mom come true, so he sent us all to Europe, well, with mom and dad. But Jamie and I, my brothers, my sister, their spouses, no kids, and we all went and traveled to Europe for 2 weeks. Just unreal, the joy of that. So, all that to say, we're doing well. But catch this, please. We miss you all from the deepest place of our beings. And the only thing that holds me through all of that regularly, last story, I'll jump into a message. We're on one of the missions trips to Taiwan back when we were here. And for whatever reason, it was the hardest trip we had ever had. There was just challenge and spiritual warfare going on in ways that we had not experienced. And I don't remember where we were going, but Bill McClellan and I were on a train headed across the north part of Taiwan, and we're both standing there in the train holding onto this bar over our heads and just like staring at each other, which was awkward enough, right? But we were just staring at each other, and both of us just feeling the weight of what was going on. And I remember I looked at Bill and I said, Billy, I think we just got to get the job done and go home. And for whatever reason, that little phrase and that moment together has just stuck in my heart that I realized we are on planet Earth not for us. And we do crazy things like go to the other side of the planet to make Jesus known, not for us. And the reality is, Acts 13, David, it says David accomplished the purposes that God had for him, and then he fell asleep. Code word is he died. It just burnt deep in my soul that we are here for him. And we are here to accomplish whatever it is that he has purposed for us. And once we get the job done, we get to go home. And home isn't Charles City, and it's not Omaha, and it's not Fort Wayne, Indiana for us. Home is eternity with him. And so I live under this banner still that says, let's just get this job done and let's go home. Because I got some old friends I'd like to catch up with. It is fun how many of you are moving to Omaha area. I was with Roy Watson just the other day. Kronberg's right down the road. Stephen and Jenny are getting close too. So if you want to move, but we get the job done and go home. All right, enough of all that. Sorry if you have no idea who the Sovines are. And for the rest of you who say, I didn't need all that, Kent, I do know who you are. Sorry, it's you too. Can I pray with you? Lord Jesus, we are incredibly blessed that our lives are in your hands. And that the author of our story is the Good Shepherd, the King of Kings, the one who sits on the throne above it all. We're grateful that you are attentive to us, that you know us, that you walk with us. And Jesus, we're grateful that you give us guidance along the way. And so I pray that even in these next minutes, as was prayed earlier, I pray that you would let your words become what fill the air in this room. That you would give to us what it is that we might need to hear from you in these moments. And we'll cherish that, Lord, as just a rich blessing the King of Kings spoke to his people today. I ask this in your name, Jesus. Amen. If you have a Bible with you, make your way to John chapter 10, if you would. Again, not going to really teach through a passage today as much as paint a bit of a picture. Over the course of the last many years, but certainly accelerated in the last 4 years, I have spent a lot of time looking at the church, trying to wrestle through, Jesus, what did you intend when you set this thing up? What is it that the church is really supposed to be about? And then, Jesus, what do we do with the fact that the vast majority of the church, at least in America, is not doing well? Like, the statistics are not good. It's something around 80% of the American church is either stagnant or dying. In other words, we're about a generation away from looking like all of those church buildings my family just walked through across Europe, where they're dark and cold and empty. And all of those who study the church in America of today, or most of those, would say we are right behind that same picture. And as a guy who's now supposed to sit in a chair that's supposed to come alongside and serve the local church, my heart starts to get really burdened really quickly. Lord Jesus, what did you intend, and how do we get back there? And as I've wrestled down through that, there is a picture that has started to be painted in my mind that I would love to just sort of throw out there and let you then say, here's maybe what the Lord wants for us in the midst of that. Churches have journeys, and I know a bit of the journey of the last few years for you all. And y'all have had some journeys. Let me just assure you that's 100% natural for every church out there. But in the midst of that, I asked the question for Bethany, for you all, for every other church that I play with in our district, Jesus, what did you intend? And again, how do we get there? And I want to set the stage for this picture I'll paint by taking you into John chapter 10 for a minute, where Jesus is describing himself and his relationship with his sheep, calling himself the Good Shepherd. And this is that passage where Jesus says, there is an enemy who comes to kill and to steal and to destroy. But I have come, the Good Shepherd says, I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. Abundant life. There's a whole ton of stuff to dig into, but just look at verse 27. Jesus says, my sheep listen to my voice. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. Now, I can't get past the very first part of that verse, because I just want to hit time out and say, really? My sheep listen to my voice. And I think, really? Because I walk into a lot of settings. I drink so much coffee, it's ridiculous. I find myself in so many restaurants meeting with people. I'm the guy now that's ordering soup at the steakhouse because I just get sick of eating. I'm with people all the time, which isn't my natural way, but, and most of the people I spend time with, I don't know well. And so I'll sit down with a young couple. They're ambitious. They're excited. We're headed to Zimbabwe. And I'll just say, hey, tell me your story. And so they begin to tell me this story, and they're going to go save the world, and it's going to be beautiful. And inevitably, somewhere in the midst of the conversation, I'm just going to get quiet for a moment. I'm going to give them a look. And I usually say something like this. Hey, in the midst of all this, what do you feel Jesus is saying to you? And so often, that's where the conversation just goes quiet. They got all kinds of noise that's been coming into their lives, all kinds of voices. They've read all kinds of books. They've been to every seminar out there, and they've got all this noise in their brain. But the reality is, they haven't heard from Jesus. I sit with elder teams in local churches, and they're wrestling through something. Maybe it's a new effort of planting, or maybe it's a different kind of scenario where things aren't going well. And hey, tell me a little of the story. Same thing. Walk all the way down through it, people chiming in all over the place with all kinds of thoughts. And, I used to be a part of a church, and there we did this. And, we all went and saw this seminar together. We read this book together, and it says this. And there are all these voices that are speaking into this elder team's life. And inevitably, I'll pause in that conversation. I'll kind of give a look. Hey, in the midst of all this, what do you hear Jesus say? And often it's just silent. And I come to John 10:27, and he says, "My sheep listen to my voice." And I think, what if that was really true? He goes on then and he says, "I know them." Now, had he asked me, I think I would have said, Jesus, I think the verse is going to flow better if you said, "My sheep listen to my voice, they know me, and they follow me." But he doesn't say that. He flips the coin. He says, "My sheep listen to my voice," and then he flips it and says, "I know them." So I've had to wrestle down through that. What is that, Lord? Here's what I've realized, is often what we think is the voice of Jesus is really our sort of, well, in general, I know this is what Jesus would say to the church. And I think Jesus' point here isn't, look, I'm not a cosmic being who just drops sort of general statements out there. He says, when I speak to my sheep, I am speaking to a people that I know. Bethany Alliance, he knows you. He knows you. He knows everything about you. He knows everything about where you're at today. He knows everything about the context in which you live. He knows everything about what it's going to take for the gospel to get into more lives, for more people to encounter Jesus. He knows all of that. So when the King speaks to you, he's not some cosmic aloof being just dropping generalized statements. He is speaking directly to a specific people in a specific place at a specific time. Which makes me go back to the first part and say, are we hearing his voice? And then he goes on and says, "And my sheep follow me." So I read down through that, and I think about, in my brain, I picture about 67 churches out there. Some people ask, how do you not know how many churches are in the district? And I say, well, I got a whole list of church plant projects, and some of them you'd probably call church, and some we'd say are just percolating. And so let's just go with 67, 68 churches or so. I start to think about those 67 churches across a 5-state district, and I start to think, what if? What if John 10 was for real? And 3 parts of the sort of the dreams start to become real clear in my head. Let me walk you through these. You take what the Lord wants you to take. The first one is this. I dream about 67 churches. Church families filled with people intent on hearing God's voice. 67 church families slam full of people who are intent on hearing His voice. Intent on hearing His voice to the point that they build out the rhythms of their life together, the rhythms of their ministry, centered around, we want to hear God speak to us. Now, I don't know where that might take your brain. The reality is we live in an incredibly noisy society. The amount of noise bombarding your lives is crazy. All of the inputs, all of the devices, all of the news, all of the voices that come pounding you all the time. And then we try to pull away from that and we start reading books. And we've read so many books on so many things. And we start running here and we run there and we check out this and we check out that. And y'all have married off and graduated your kids and they've spread all over the country, all over the globe. And now they've got all kinds of experiences. And we all come back into life together as the church with a whole pile of noise. So when we come down to what's the Lord wants, all of this stuff is just flying all the time. Intermixed with all that noise is the most dangerous noise. And that's my own personal preferences. That's my own voice. That's my own thought of how it should go. And so in the midst of all of the people I could quote or the situations I've been a part of and could say, we ought to do this, we ought to do this, we ought to do this, this is the best way to go about it. Then we put Kent into that thing. We interject my stuff into that. And again, there's so many voices. Makes me step back and say, what if we had 67 church families, slam full of people, who were dead set that they were going to go figure out what is the King saying to us. Now, some of you know a bit of my story, not going back into all of that, but my spiritual intimacy with the Lord is such that I have to ask really simple questions and listen for really simple answers. Like, I don't do well with Jesus, what do you want for my future kinds of questions. There's too much noise in my head. I will fill that with so much junk. And so I've learned in my own journey to boil it down to very specific questions. And often, Jesus, would you just put on a whiteboard in my brain, yes or no? Because I don't know if I'm going to do well at discerning much more than that. So then you have to start asking the question, what questions do we need to ask? What is it that the Lord might have for us that we need to just listen together? When I bump across staff teams who are intent on hearing His voice, who orchestrate their schedules and the rhythms of how they do life and ministry together around hearing the King, I start to get really excited. Truth is, I don't care what the King says to you. I just want to know you heard His voice. He may tell you to go move the whole thing to Alaska. Great, let's move to Alaska. The beautiful part isn't so much whether we really enjoy what He said to us. The beautiful part is, I've heard the King. When I get around elder teams, particularly when they've got this like deer in the headlights look, and they're like, man, Kent, Jesus has told us, and it scares them to death. I'm usually in those moments like, oh, we're on to something here. Now, please don't think I'm trying to like push some sort of mysticism. I've been weirded out any more than what once was in the last few years. But I believe Jesus still speaks to the sheep. And I dream about churches slam full of people who are intent on hearing his voice. The second thing that I dream about as I think about 67 churches out there is what if there were 67 church families spread across our districts who are then filled with people obediently walking in deep dependence upon the Spirit of God? 67 church families filled with people intent on obediently walking in deep dependence upon the Spirit of God. In other words, not only have we heard his voice, but we are now responding to what he has said. There's a massive difference in the Sovine household from the kids hearing my voice and actually listening to my voice, right? You heard me. Dad, I didn't hear anything. Well, how'd you know I was talking to you, right? You see, there are settings where people have heard Jesus. The truth is, it was about 30 years ago, and they've yet to move. I sat with a group of them recently. They've got a vision to see the church planted in their town. It's a town of like 212 people out in the middle of straight nowhere. Can't we feel like the Lord put this in our hearts about 30 years ago? Start doing the math. These aren't spring chickens that are going after this. And I sat in the living room and said, let's go. And they now have, in a town of 212 people, they're about 3 months old. They've got about 50, 55 people showing up to their gatherings. Do the math. It's 25% of the town. Because they responded to the Lord's voice. Finally. You see, we've got to move from we've heard the King to we're now walking in obedience, keeping this in mind. I think it's about 9.9 times out of 10, when Jesus invites you into something, that something is going to be bigger than what you can handle. He is going to call you into that which is going to be beyond what you are going to have the capacity to be able to work out in your own strength. And so it's why I put in here, it's deep dependence upon his spirits. This is where the faith journey moves beyond we're trusting him for salvation to we're trusting him for life. And it is you and I saying, yes, Lord. Now you're going to have to show up and lead us through this or it's never going to happen. What if there were 67 churches out there filled with people, intent on doing whatever it is the shepherd said? Trusting his Spirit, believing that he's enough to be able to see him through. I start to get excited and I start to think, statistics are going to change here. And please know, it's not about statistics for me. But the trend that the church is on of today starts to change. When church families and elder teams and staff teams are hearing the Lord's voice and then responding in obedience, walking in deep dependence on the Spirit. That's when it's like, some fun stuff's about to happen here. Takes me to a third piece of the dream. That as I study the scriptures, and you all know this well, as I study the scriptures and start to sort of process through the Lord's voice, I want to be careful to stay very attentive to the fact that the vast majority of what he wants to say to us, he already said. And one of the things that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt the Lord is going to call his church to comes out of what we now label as the Great Commission, right? It's in all four Gospels. It's in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 1, verse 8, where Jesus says, I want you, church, to go make disciples of all nations. And so just to get the ball rolling in local churches, as I work with church plants, or if I have opportunity to spend time with another established church, we just jump to, hey, what if we had 67 churches out there where the people, all of them, were intent on raising up what I call disciple-making disciples? They were just dead set, if we accomplish nothing else, we're going to make disciples who can make disciples. The way I phrase it is raising up disciple makers, raising up disciple-making disciples who own their geography. Now, I'll come back to that in a minute. But I start to look at 5 states and think, if we had churches where there was a culture of making disciples, who are then able to go make other disciples, who can then go make other disciples, and all of those people start to take ownership for some geography, for some territory. Now I think we start to get on to what the Lord Jesus had in mind. Here's the kicker with that, is we have been at the Great Commission for about 2,000 years now. And the truth is, if you walk up to 100 different Christ followers today, and you say, or you ask, hey, what is a disciple? If they give you an answer, it's going to be very different from the last answer you heard. If you then ask, what does it take to make a disciple? Again, there's just this silence. The truth is, and this is one of those places I wish I had a few years back with Bethany. The truth is, there's fuzziness out there on what a disciple even is, and then there's even greater fuzziness on how do you begin to even make one. And so I start to dream about, what if we actually figured that out? What if we had church families where everybody in the church family could answer those 2 questions? Here's what a disciple is. Here's how you make one. And what if there were church families where Stevie comes to Christ, and you could take Stevie to any person in the family, and that person would know exactly what to do to help Stevie become a disciple? Can you picture that? I've seen it once. In all the places I've played, I've seen it once. And I saw it in a ministry called Really Recovered. It's almost a prerequisite that you are a former addict to be a part. I mean, it's crazy what the Lord is doing. For those folks, the moment somebody commits his or her life to Christ, they could introduce him to anybody in the church family, and that person would know what to do. And I just think, what if there were 150 people who all raised their hand and said, I got it. I know what to do with them. I'll walk with them. In one of the trainings that we do, we talk a lot about your initial disciple-making approach. And we encourage church plants to figure out what's the thing that everybody in the church family is going to get trained in, where they know for at least the first 6 to 8 weeks with a new follower of Christ, here's what we do with them. And everybody in that family knows exactly how to pull that off. Even if a Billy Graham were to walk in, You take Billy Graham aside and you say, hey, Billy, around here, when somebody commits their life to Christ, here's what we do to get them started. We need you to go through the training. And Billy Graham goes through 6 weeks of your training. But think about the culture that begins to get created in the local church when you've got that size of a group of people who all share the same understanding of what we're after. The same understanding of what a disciple is, the same understanding of how to make one. Now, disciple making is not a program that you could sign up for. Hey, you want to come to another class on Thursday nights? Well, 10 of you maybe do. Disciple making isn't a program you sign up for. Disciple making is now the culture in which you do all of life. And I start dreaming of that, of what if? And what if the disciples you're raising up were raised up such that they now are ready to go make other disciples? 2 Timothy 2:2. Remember that verse? Paul says to his disciple, Timothy, and the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable men who will also be qualified to teach others. There are 4 generations of discipleship in that one passage. Paul discipling Timothy. Timothy, I want you to go disciple some others. Make sure you disciple others who then are equipped and qualified to disciple that 4th generation. And the picture is there's just this snowball. I start to get excited. And then I start to kick myself and think, oh my goodness, I could have done so much better to help lead a church. That's yesterday. But what if? Because I'm not sure Jesus is going to entrust babies to people who don't know what to do with the baby. And I should have said this a long time ago. Please don't hear me talking about this is Bethany. This is my perspective all over the place. I couldn't answer that question for you guys right now, where you feel you are and that kind of stuff. I just know that when church families are ready to receive spiritual infants, Jesus has a habit of bringing spiritual infants. Now, one of the things that gets in the way of that is when we start to see a select group of people in the setting as, well, they're the ones that need to do that. Oh, yeah, they need to go meet with. No. My dream is not that at all. My dream is pick anybody in the church family you bump into. Hand them Stevie and they're ready to roll. Because they know what a disciple is. They know how to make one. And they have owned this thing as this is what we need to get after. Raising up disciple-making disciples who then own their geography. I'm struck as I travel around our district at the magnitude of this thing. 80 million in the central region, 19 million of those folks are in my district. So I pull up to the table with these 9 other guys, and I realize 25% of this pie I'm supposed to somehow take ownership for. And as I think about 19 million people in our district, I get really overwhelmed really quickly. Because I start to do some math, and I think, all right, 67 churches scattered amongst 19 million, we don't have a shot. So then I jump to the official licensed workers list of the districts. And I can come up with maybe about 250 licensed workers around our district. And I think, all right, that's better than 67. But even if we had every pastor on board going after it, 250 people are not going to be able to get this thing done. So quickly you start to say, all right, we either just start going back to playing some church game and let's just do what churches do, or we start to change the numbers a little bit. Within the 67 churches in the Mid-America District, there are almost 25,000 Christ followers. So that's when I sort of kick back a little bit at my desk and think, we could start to make a dent with 25,000 people. Like 67 of us, that's not going to work. 250 of us, that's not going to work. But if we could mobilize 25,000 to get after it, we could start to see the kingdom advance in some brand new ways. We could start to see Jesus honored in some brand new places. And so the Lord's just birthed this dream in my heart. What if? What if our church families were filled with people intent on hearing his voice, intent on walking obediently in deep dependence upon his Spirit, and intent on creating a culture where disciples are being made, who then say, we got Northeast Iowa. Look, I've got the school. I've got the hospital. I've got the whatever you're a part of, ball team, neighborhood, name it. If we have 25,000 people all saying, this part, this one's mine. Lord Jesus, help me get after this. I think the church starts to be what Jesus intended. And so my dream for Bethany, the same with the other churches in our district that I play with now. My dream isn't some new program. It's not some, hey, here's a conference you all need to go to, and it's the coolest thing about churches. My dream is not to find you the best book out there on church whatever. My dream is we hear his voice. And we get after it. And one little selfish part of that is if we get the job done, then we get to go home. And I get to hang out with some old friends. And that sounds super fun. Let me pray for you. Lord Jesus, eternally grateful for these folks, for the gift that they once were, and in many ways still are, to my family and to my story, to our journey. We're so grateful. Jesus, we're grateful for how you have used these folks to raise up disciples. Grateful for how you've used them to help raise up me as a disciple, to pour into our kids, to pour into my wife. We're grateful for the discipleship that has happened in and through the life of this church family for decades and decades. And yet, Lord, I look across the landscape and the darkness is just so prevalent. The lostness of this community, of this county, of this area, it's just evident. It's evident every day. And so I pray, Jesus, for your name's sake and for the sake of eternity changing for even countless others, I pray, Jesus, would these be days where this family hears your voice. I thank you for the places you've been speaking to them. I thank you for the places where they've already been called into obedience to you. But Lord, I pray for more of that, for more of your voice. I pray that there would be small groups of people who find themselves gathered around your word in a living room somewhere seeking you. And I pray that in those moments, they would be struck by how clearly the Good Shepherd just spoke to them. I pray that when they're sitting across the table from a coworker and they're scratching their heads saying, I know I need to point this person to Jesus, but I don't have a clue how. I pray that they would be struck in those moments that the Good Shepherd, who knows all about it, just showed up and spoke to them. I pray that where this family hits a wall, trying to figure out how to navigate their way through it or find a way around it or how to break it down, I pray that collectively, as a unified body, they would be struck by how clearly, Jesus, they hear your voice. And then, Lord, I pray, would you pour out your Spirit? Would you pour out your Spirit on men and women and young people in even a new and refreshing way? Lord, the moment that Bill and Coulter and I, probably 3 years ago now, stood on an arena floor in Long Beach, California, bawled our eyes out, crying out to you, saying, would you let just a river of water flow through this family in a way that your Spirit just has his way. And that they would experience just a fun sense of you. Lord, together we invite you, would you tear down anything that might be in the way of your Spirit having full freedom? I know what it feels like, Lord, to grieve your Spirit. I know what it feels like to feel like there's a brick wall between me and you. I know the things that I do in my life, the many things I have done in my life that have put those walls up. And Jesus, would you forgive us of those things? Would you forgive us for when we bring all the extraneous noise into the story? We'd ask, Jesus, might you tear down walls? Wherever it is that there might be a wall, that your Spirit would be able to blow through this family in just a fun, beautiful, life-giving way. And then, Lord, would you give them clarity, I pray, around what it means to make disciples. Protect them from running programs for the sake of running programs. Help them to see discipleship as you see it, whatever that means. I don't even know what I'm praying here, Lord, but I ask, would you give clarity? And I pray that there would be a day where every person in the family would be able to take a spiritual infant under their wing and say, I got him. And that every one of us might be able to point to a generation ahead of us and say, that's who's discipling me. And then maybe point to a generation behind us and say, and that's who I'm discipling. And that there would be this pervasive culture within the life of your church, Jesus, where disciple making, this thing that you have given to us as your commission, it would just be a natural, clear piece of the culture of your church. Lord, I'm grateful that you know us. I'm grateful that you know some friends in this room, this church family. Would you speak to them? Be near. We pray all this in your name, Lord. Amen.